Hi, I'm Greg Hunter. Thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. Joining us today, once again, Catherine Austin Fitts. She runs Solari.com and the author of the Solari Report. A few of her resume items include she's a big Wall Street banker. She's invested more than $25 billion. She's overseen $300 billion in assets. You're a former assistant housing secretary. Catherine Austin Fitts, thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, thank you for having me back. It's always a pleasure.
Well, just last week on Friday, I was doing my weekly news wrap-up, and I said, we had this big budget, conference. We kicked the can down the road for a couple of months. I mean, a few years ago, the then Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mullins, said this was a national security issue, and all of a sudden, boom, we're into this big dogfight over gun control. What gives, Ms. Fitts?
Well, if you look at the reforms they're trying to implement, what they're trying to do is take away guns from the taxpayers, essentially. It's a little bit scary, the timing of this, and I think a little bit obvious. If you look at all the statistics and really excellent academic studies on gun control, what it tells you is that guns are very, very effective at protecting the honest people. And so it doesn't make any sense that you would try and strip the honest group of their protection just at this point in time. And my concern is if you look at both the push for drones in the skies and the effort to take away particularly semi-automatic weapons from the taxpayers, why is this happening? And I think it's happening because if you look at where they want to go in terms of increase in taxes and spending cuts, they don't want to do that until they've disarmed the population that has financial assets. I mean, I hate to say this, gun control is about making it easier to take away the financial assets of the honest, hardworking people.
So they must be worried about what they're going to have to do. Is it just a fight between, cutting spending and raising taxes, or is there something more to this fight? Something's going to give.
There's something much deeper, because if you look at how the federal finances have been run, they've been run not in compliance with the Constitution or the law related to federal financial management. So once you start to cut deeply, whether it's taxes or spending, into the taxpayers, there is real concern that the taxpayers are going to take a look at the federal accounts and say, look, not all is kosher. And frankly, the legal, if you look at what's been happening, the legal grounds are with the citizens, not with Congress or the administration. So you literally have the risk the citizens start to assert proper legal authority over the finances of the country. And that would be a very difficult thing. I also think they're concerned about the increase in crime that could happen if you get deep cuts in spending.
Well, there's crime, and I read your latest article, which is, coming clean beyond the fiscal cliff. And some of the topics were we don't have reliable information, we don't have good information, the government does illegal spending, as you just talked about, on and off, balance sheet, right, or on and off budget. We have military and war and organized crime, and all this banker crime is leading to a trust issue. For example, HSBC, a long line of big banks that were money laundering and just got a $1.9 billion fine. They were money laundering for drug cartels and a terrorist, and they just get a slap on the wrist. And if you take a look at all this other $40 billion a month buying the mistakes of bankers, hey, this was supposed to be, AAA rated, equal to a treasury, and they're buying it at a rate of $40 billion a month. And then other big banks like J.P. Morgan just fined for the mortgage-backed security, a big settlement with the Fed, basically let everybody off the hook for these securities that turned toxic, that weren't AAA rated. Isn't there a massive amount of crime at the big bank level here in America?
Well, the American economy has grown on the cash flows of organized crime. So after World War II, Greg, we opened our markets up to narcotics trafficking, and that is a very big cash business in every county in America. And if you read my writings, it'll explain why I believe that is part of the financing that's going into the black budget. one of the reasons I think that HSBC was doing such a big cash flow in Mexico is the government accounts, the U.S. government accounts don't operate in Mexico. You don't have HUD in Mexico. And so you have to you can't use government accounts in Mexico. And one of the issues is how is the government and the black budget going to get their piece? And so we see the settlement. But the administration made it very clear they didn't want to indict or in any way prosecute individual officers. So we have the officers of HSBC keeping their bonuses from doing this activity, and none of them have been held financially or legally responsible. Well, why is that? You can't continue to operate more than $1 trillion, according to the Department of Justice, of global money laundering working through the U.S. financial system every year if a bank officer is afraid of their liabilities.
Well, the other thing, too, is just to show people how fragile the economy is. I mean, if the economy was truly in recovery, would we be spending $85 billion each and every month with the mortgage-backed securities being bought off the bank's book at $40 billion and also at $45 billion buying treasury bonds? And the other thing is that the regulators with HSBC, when they were pushed about, hey, they were money laundering for drug cartels and terrorists, why no criminal charges? No kidding, the regulators said they're afraid of imploding the financial system, not just HSBC. Afraid of imploding the financial system. Doesn't that tell you how weak and how corrupt and how terrible the economy is?
Well, narcotics trafficking has been something that's been going on. This is a very old business. And, and this is a business that the banking system has been depending on for hundreds of years. So I think this corruption is very long-lived. And the more important question is, if you look at the economic model that we're operating on, the question is, when you go into a community, do you make money from the success of the people and the environment there? So the living systems, whether it's the success of the people or the environment, or do you make money by stripping it? And right now we have a model operating on planet Earth where we make money from stripping, and then once we get control, building it up again. So it's sort of a pump and dump of places. And narcotics trafficking has been for many years, not just in Mexico, but throughout the United States, has been the juggernaut by which you do, in essence, a leverage buyout of the neighborhood. I've written a lot of articles about this, but essentially you bring in drugs to a place that generates a cash flow. You use that cash flow to then bring in your businesses and essentially take over the neighborhood. And it's a remarkably profitable way of organizing a takeover of the economy. And it's one that in the United States we've supported for centuries. And it's worked very well for us until not that long ago, when frankly our neighborhoods were all overrun by it. So I think, we've talked about my red button story. Do you remember the red button story?
Yes, I read that article about in the early 2000s. You ask a room full of people, if you could just press a red button and stop all this illegal drug money, would you do it? And 99 out of 100 said no, because they're afraid of they're afraid of collapsing the banks. I couldn't believe that.
Well, they weren't afraid of collapsing the banks. They said we would have trouble financing the government deficit, so our government checks might stop, our taxes might go up, and our 401ks and IRAs might go down. So I think, this issue of dependency on activities that harm other people is a much wider question, taking in not only organized crime and warfare, but the corruption of the food system and the corruption of, the water system, and on and on and on and on. And what each one of us needs to ask ourselves, am I making money from something that brings health, wealth, and success, or am I making money from something that's harmful? So all throughout the country during the housing bubble, we had millions of people making money on a fraudulent mortgage bubble that wasn't just Washington and Wall Street. That was in every county in America. But let me bring it back to gun control, because one of the things that's important to understand is, I have semi-automatic weapons because I live in a county where there's drug dealing. And what I believe is that drug dealing is absolutely financing the government and its black budget and is supported by the government. And if you look at the home invasions that those drug gangs occasionally do, they come in packs of 3. And if I'm going to have to deal with a home invasion by a drug gang, then I want semi-automatic weapons, because there's going to be 3 of them and 1 of me. Okay? And so the idea that, the Attorney General is running drug gangs into my community, and to protect myself, I need a gun, and he wants me to not have that gun, I don't think so. So I think this, as people understand the extent to which the goal of the administration is to take away from honest citizens weaponry that absolutely has been demonstrated throughout time to protect them, whether from local crime, government sponsored or not. I think there's a real risk here that they're going to awake the sleeping giant.
Well, I hope so. But aren't we going to have to pay for this fiscal cliff? I mean, everybody's been in this nirvana that we can spend all we want, do anything we want, borrow all the money we want. 95% of the car loans are all, provided by the government. I mean, don't we really have a fight as to who's going to pay for this between the Democrats and Republicans? Could you explain that?
Oh, well, I think this has been decided. You have the military, who's required to keep the dollar, the reserve currency globally by controlling the sea lanes and the satellites. You have the creditors who are demanding interest, and Lord forbid the interest rates should go up. And then you have the rest of us. And the rest of us break down into people who are putting cash into the system with taxes and Social Security, and people who aren't. So it's pretty easy to figure out who's going to get hurt here. Because to keep the game afoot, you need the military, you need the creditors, and you need the people who are generating cash for the system. It's the people who now have been putting money into the system but now are ready for it back that are going to be in real political danger. And in essence, once you have computer voting fraud, and once you have, strip the guns from the population, they literally have no protection.
So, which brings me to my next thing. You talked in the last interview we did about, and people have asked me about that new currency coming. Now, I know I'm not going to put you on the spot and say when, but what's the new currency going to look like, and why is it going to be introduced?
Well, I think it is, let's just back up, because first of all, we don't know that there's going to be a new currency, okay? Because this can absolutely be an evolution of the current currencies. So let's step back and look at currencies. First of all, currency is part of a governance system, and you never want to talk about currencies outside of, okay, what's the governance system? How are we going to govern? Okay?
Okay.
So never talk about the currencies without talking about the governance system. And if you look at what's going on, we had the New York Times write an editorial suggesting that we ought to trash the Constitution.
That
and at
lawyer
the
should
same
be disbarred.
One of the lead institutional investors saying, we don't need divided government. We need, one government. So this Democrat-Republican thing doesn't work. That's the New York Times and Wall Street basically saying, okay, we need a fascist government. So that's a discussion about the governance system. And remember, the currency is part of that. So never separate them. Big mistake. That's number one. Number two, we've had a currency system. What the leadership most wants is not that you have a new currency, but that you have a currency that's all digital. So you're watching a great debate about, is it Apple or Google that's going to win the wallet, and getting everybody on a mobile phone and trying to get everybody into the banking system so that all payments can be digital. And I assure you, once we're in a spot where the currency can be entirely digital, then we're in a new state of very invasive control. Okay, so one of the things to watch is this shift to all digital. And if there's anything you can do, one of the reasons I love gold and silver is it allows me to be not digital. So that's number one. The second thing is, if you're going to have a digital currencies or a global currency or any kind of new digital currency, you need an asset to back that currency. And if you look at what's happening in the world of energy and the evolution of energy technology, there's no way that 10 to 20 years from now we can depend on oil and fossil fuel to back the global reserve currency. So if the dollar wants to maintain reserve currency status, or if we want a new currency that it has reserve currency status globally, the question is what's going to back it. And I think one of the reasons that you see such a global push by the Americans to get GMO food and the patenting of the seed supply and control of the seed supply is so that they can back a digital currency. And that could be the dollar that just evolves into that reserve status. So it doesn't have to be a new currency.
Will gold play a part? Will gold back it in some way?
Well, I think, gold has always been the primary vehicle of settling international accounts behind the scenes. So the winner of the game of Monopoly is the guy who has the most gold. So gold has a very critical role to play behind the scenes. And I've always believed that the people centralizing power have wanted to use gold to reset the economy. So let me explain it this way. If I want to steal all the assets on the planet, I want fiat currency, because it is the process of debasement that allows me to basically buy everybody up for free with money that I just print. But once I own and control everything, I have a vested interest in switching to a sound currency, because how am I going to keep it? Well, I'm going to keep it by switching to a sound currency. So I think sort of the natural next phase of the financial coup d'etat is to use gold to reset values between financial assets and tangibles. And I think what we're watching is a managed rise in the gold price, and that's in the interest of the people who are managing the financial coup d'etat. So gold will evolve to a place where it has a very important role in settling accounts. Will it be attached to the retail currency, so to speak? Who knows? It will certainly be important in the institutional, on the wholesale role of currency settlement.
And one other thing, you had talked on a separate conversation about HSBC and the $1.9 billion settlement to settle, money laundering charges from the United States government. And he said there was a overt and covert part, and you said there was a covert part that affected the price of gold. What do you think happened?
Well, usually when you have as big a settlement as this, you have, just as our economy has the overt part and the covert part, on a settlement that is this big and this critical to the heart of the cash flows, you typically have an overt part. And I think my conjecture, the day of the settlement, the department, gold was tracking very much, we were up about 16% for the year. Gold was the stock market was sliding, gold was coming up. And if you look at the year-end statistics, if we had stopped at the day of the settlement, gold would have been ahead of the equity markets, which for a variety of reasons was not ideal if you're the U.S. Treasury and coming into the fiscal deal, fiscal cliff negotiations. You have every reason to want to make the bond market strong and the dollar strong at that point. What happened literally the morning of the deal was we saw the gold price start to slide inexplicably and very dramatically. HSBC is the custodian for the big gold ETF. And, I have an article I published in 2010 called Disclosure in the Precious Metals Puzzle Palace. And I and many other people in the gold market, I think, have big questions about whether the extent to which that gold inventory has been used to help manage the market. Again, conjecture and question mark, but I think the timing of that action in the gold market vis-a-vis the settlement is very deeply disturbing.
Final question. Do you worry about war? In a past conversation, you told me that we have, overt war that we don't really have, we have right now. And also we have covert war. For example, we have I was reading about a new tsunami bomb that you just tested off the coast of New Zealand.
That was a long time ago. If you look at the New Zealand researcher got disclosure proving that the U.S. government had proven out that tsunamis could be created with underground weaponry. So I think a lot of what you and I were talking about was could there be a financial collapse? And I was saying I think the chances of financial collapse are very small, because every time we come up to a moment where a financial collapse starts to be a real risk, what happens? We get war. So I think that real financial trouble is basically solved. Different players stand to lose, and one decides to go to war and steal somebody else's stuff to plug their hole. And you literally have a game of musical chairs, and somebody has to get thrown out of the game. And that's what war is. And again, it can be covert and overt, but I think the risk as we go through this period is an increase in war. Now, let's go back to drugs. Drugs is simply a form of depopulation. You come into a place, you liquidate the people, you take control of their assets. And it's been a very effective tool of taking over places and depopulation. And one way to solve some of this problem, and we know, Greg, that between 1990 and approximately 2 years ago when the study was through, if you take the oldest group in America who do not have, sort of 70 plus, do not have high school education, the life expectancy of that cohort dropped among women 5 years and men 3 years. That's an absolutely stunning decrease in life expectancy in one of the richest countries in the world. So, I think the pressure is really on, and the question is, are we going to change and integrate new technology, or are we going to depopulate and go to war?
That's a big question. In terms of the covert war, do you think the tsunami in Indonesia had anything to do with that crazy bomb? I mean, what do you think?
Well, one of the reasons I was so interested in the New Zealand researchers article, and it's up on my website if you want to go back and roll through the blog, was a week before the tsunami. I was working with somebody who had a closed-end fund position that had 15% of the paper in Indonesian sovereign debt. And a week before the tsunami, it dropped overnight, massive insider trading, when there was no change in interest rates, no change in the market. We couldn't figure out what was going on. I mean, it was inexplicable. What just happened? And then a week later, the tsunami happened, and I realized someone knew a week ahead of time that something terrible was going to happen in Indonesia. So, the only hypothesis I've ever been able to conjecture for that is they knew a week ahead of time. Now, how did they do that? How did they know?
I guess the uptake is don't expect a major collapse. If it gets close, expect overt or covert war.
Right. Markets clear right now with war, much more, and force, much more than they clear with price.
All right, Catherine Austin Fitts, the Solari, Solari.com, author of the Solari Report. Thank you so much for being on USAWatchdog.com.
Greg, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.